So, here is the setting of this Sunday's reading from Ruth. It is a fall evening in the wheat fields near Bethlehem. And people are winnowing the new grain, separating the kernels from the chaff. And they've started about 4 in the afternoon because they take advantage of the wind that blows in off the Mediterranean in the afternoon. And they will continue winnowing until sometime early evening after sundown, when that wind finally settles down. Boaz is supervising the women. They're casting the grain into that cool breeze off the Med. Naomi has taken it upon herself to find a new life for her daughter-in-law, Ruth. She tells Ruth, "Now wash and anoint yourself and put on your best clothes and go down to the threshing floor." Now these are the preparations that a bride makes prior to her wedding. But, Naomi says, "Do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking." Now this is not seduction, it's not manipulation. Naomi is simply saying to Ruth that she should wait until the work is done so that Boaz is not distracted, so that he can give her his full attention. And what follows is not some love scene. Ruth is simply calling her circumstances as a widow, as a stranger in a strange land. She's calling her condition to the attention of Boaz, because Boaz is a close relative of Naomi and is in a position to help her if he chooses to do so. Ruth is calling upon Boaz to see her circumstances and to mind his responsibility as a kinsman. Now, to understand what is going on, you have to understand the importance of lineage to the Jews. All those begats in the Bible, the Old Testament, so-and-so begat, they are there so that lineage can be traced and proclaimed. It's of great importance. And Ruth is a widow, which means that the lineage of Elimelech, Naomi's husband, and of Mahlon, who is Ruth's husband, that lineage will come to an end unless Ruth is married to one of Naomi's close relatives. It is not necessary for Boaz to come to her aid. In fact, he goes to a closer relative, and that relative is not interested in helping. And in the end, Boaz goes above and beyond what is required. He buys back the land that Elimelech had owned and makes it Ruth's, and marries her in order to do that, because a woman could not own land. But I think it goes deeper than just that. I think Boaz sees the sacrifice that Ruth has made. She gave up everything for the love of her mother-in-law, Naomi. She gave to Naomi the only thing she had to give, herself. And Boaz recognizes that. And I think in order for Boaz to recognize that, there has to be something of that in him. Her soul calls to his. She inspires him to do all that he can do. How often are you inclined to go above and beyond, to walk the extra mile? Does God speak to you, to your soul, inspiring you to trust in him? Because God seeks to inspire us to trust so that we can grab hold of the new life that Christ offers us. The widow in Jerusalem was much like Ruth. She had lost almost everything. Emphasis. That's emphasis.
Everything. Everything. Maybe there is a Holy Spirit after all.
So,
He's not a golfer.
she had lost everything, but she gave what little she had left to the poor. See, Jesus had been teaching in the city with crowds of common folk coming to hear what this new teacher had to say. And just before this passage, Jesus had criticized the scribes and the Pharisees for teachings that were incomplete, that didn't properly interpret the scriptures. Now Jesus goes further. He says their practice of religion is hypocritical. They enjoy the appearance of scholarship, whatever their teachings. They strut about in clothes that proclaim their wealth and position, but the truth is very different. How do they get that wealth? They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearance, they say long prayers. Jesus is saying this not only of the scribes and Pharisees, but he's saying it as a message to his disciples and to us, to his followers. Because if you remember the last month or so, Jesus constantly is saying things like this to his disciples. No one is better or worse than another. We will not be able to carry the cross of Jesus. The spiritual world has nothing to do with appearances. Pride and pretense are not pleasing to God. So this is just a culmination of all these things he has been saying. And like the psalmist said, unless the Lord builds a house, those who build it labor in vain. Now as Jesus is speaking there, standing by the treasury. The treasury is not some bank-like building, a huge bank with marble columns and so on. There's a simple room, a hall. And in that room is the treasury itself. And the treasury is a chest with a horn-shaped tube coming out of the top into which you put your coins. Now these contributions aren't the temple tax. They're completely voluntary. So you would go in, you drop your coins in, and you can hear the coin as it rattles down into the box. And it was voluntary, and it was also very public. So the more you contributed, the longer the rattle lasted, and the louder the noise, and the more righteous you appeared. And then the widow comes in. Perhaps she's one who's had her house taken. And she walks up to the treasury. And I imagine her being very hesitant about this, because she's in this room where there are many people milling about. Perhaps they've just done their prayers, or they're about to go out to prayer, and they're contributing their money. And she takes her 2 coins and drops them into the treasury, and they make hardly any noise at all, something like this. This, in fact, courtesy of Tim, is one of the coins like the widow actually dropped into the treasury. It's a pruta, is that right?
Pruta.
Pruta.
And by the way, I'm convinced it's the one that the widow dropped in, okay?
I would like to point out that this one was struck in the year 31, which would have been a little too late.
It's just about the right time.
So this is actually, and this is from the true cross. So, but anyway, this little tiny coin, 2 of those, is all she had. She is poor, but she is given out of her poverty. Here, Tim, you want to let people see that? Just pass it around. Thank you. Be careful with it. It's worth more than a penny these days.
I've taken it out of the thing you're holding in your hand. It's, 2,000 years old. And it was minted by Pontius Pilate.
So, as she does this, Jesus is watching. And he says, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on. She has gone above and beyond any expectations or requirements. She is poor, but she has given out of her poverty in order to help people who have even less than she does." I've found, and probably most of you have, that the poor are often more generous than the rich, because they know need in a way that the rich cannot. And while the rich may hold something back, just in case, a little something to keep for the future, the widow knows that she cannot expect or rely on future fortune. The rich can't either, by the way, but they tend not to look at that. The widow, she knows that there are some needs that cannot wait. So she gave all that she had because she was compassionate. And that compassion was based, I believe, on her absolute trust of God. She knew that she could rely on God to take care of her. Have you ever given, given till it really hurts? Have you put off your own needs for the sake of someone in greater need? Now, I have a confession to make. Your pastor is behind in his pledge. because our house needed new paint, it needed a new roof. It was a 60-year-old roof. And I say, I will pay that pledge. I tell myself that, hoping, thinking, yeah, I'm going to be able to do that. But I put myself first. I did not trust God as the widow trusted God. I am a Presbyterian. I am of largely Scottish ancestry. And there are those are two things which do not predispose me to trust God. Quite the opposite. I have experienced financial insecurity, and I put it behind me. And told myself that it was something I did. That I made some good decisions which had enabled me to get back on course. I did not say it's something that God did for me. I didn't look at God's influence in my life. I failed to trust God. And when God took care of me, I took the credit. How many of you have failed to trust God in some way, at some time? Have you been, as the psalmist says, eating the bread of anxious toil? What a great turn of phrase. Have you been working so hard, so fearful of what will happen if you don't earn more and more, or whatever the case may be? Have you been eating the bread of anxious toil instead of recognizing the gifts God gives us even as we sleep? In your list of priorities, how does a roof rate? How does contributions to your 401k? Where does that come into your list of priorities? Have you failed to go above and beyond and to do the work of God's kingdom? Care of self, worrying about our future, is so ingrained in us that we usually don't recognize that we're not trusting in God when we think that way. But our future is in God's hands. The widow was doing God's work and trusting that God would take care of her. And so she is truly an exemplar of the great commandment that Jesus has given us. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Christ himself entered once for all into the holy place, Hebrews says. Not with the blood of goats and calves, but with his own blood, thus obtaining eternal redemption. We think of Jesus, all that he said, all that he did, as showing the love of God, as replacing our fear with peace, as being the one upon whom our hope is based. But what is the ground upon which Jesus stood? It is his absolute trust in God. So it is that Christ comes to the true end of all religion, the selfless service of the loving God. And all you have to do is show up. And do the work that God puts before you to do, and not to worry about it. God's taken care of it. Christ came as high priest of the good things that have come. The things that have come through Christ, not the worldly rewards promised by the priests of Jesus' day, but the reward of serving God wherever he calls you. That, the work, the serving of God, that is also the reward. We aren't all called to give up everything, only to respond when God challenges us, as Ruth challenged Boaz, calling us to recognize ourselves, that we might have a deeper understanding of faith. God continually calls us to new life. He calls us into the law of love, into the fullness of new life that he desires for us. He calls us into giving whatever we must, everything if need be, for the sake of the kingdom of God. Trust in God. I say that to myself as much as I say it to you. Trust in God for the good things of the new life that Christ has brought into this world. Amen.
Amen.